Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up.
Welcome to episode number 87 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is never quitting. Our quote of the day comes to us from Wilma Mankiller. The secret of our success is that we never give up. It is my pleasure to bring you today's episode, which features a gentleman by the name of Thom Singer, who is a very successful podcast host, speaker, and master of ceremonies. Thom mentioned something 3 different times on today's show that I think resonates very well with the No Quit family. Thom shares that he believes 100% of the people that quit don't make it. After a long career in sales and marketing, Thom decided that he wanted to become a professional speaker. The reason he was able to do so and make that happen was because even when things got tough, he never gave up on that dream. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope if you were or are thinking about quitting, that you don't. Today's episode is sponsored by the Rocket Entrepreneur. Are you ready for a breakthrough in your business? Learn from myself and 25 other successful influencers and thought leaders sharing how to make 2018 your best year yet. We're going to give you specific advice and strategies to help you break through your plateau and make 2018 your most profitable year ever. This online event is 100% free, and you can watch the interviews on your own time when it fits your schedule. The online event is called The Rocket Entrepreneur. Blast past plateau and make more money than ever in 2018. Please visit www.therocketentrepreneur.com. Once again, that's www.therocketentrepreneur.com. Thom, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris.
I appreciate you being here. So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to make it happen today?
I am ready to make it happen every day.
I love it. So the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never give up. I was curious if you had either a personal story about perseverance or perhaps a challenging time that tested you, but you kept on going and didn't quit.
Yeah. So, Chris, I'm a professional speaker and master of ceremonies, and I've been doing this now for 8.5 years. And I don't know, I was a couple of years into it, and I wasn't really earning what I had earned in corporate America. The recession was still on. And I was talking to someone who I knew and somewhat respected very well. And he said, so when do you quit? When do you go look for another job? And I said, I don't understand the question. He goes, when do you just say I'm never going to make it as a speaker and a workshop leader and just have to go back to a sales and marketing job? And I said, well, even if I take a job, I'm still going to do this on the side because it was working and I liked it and it was fun. And I said, all I know is that 100% of the people who quit don't make it. So I'm not quitting. I may have to adjust my plan, but I'm never going to quit. And about a year later is when I sort of spun it around and started making what I had made in corporate America. And then I've taken it up since there. And I don't know like why that was like my answer to what he said, but he's like, when are you going to quit? And I'm like, the people who quit don't succeed. I can't ever quit. You know, when do I shift my game plan? I don't know, but I'm never quitting.
No, I love that. And obviously that rings close to home with what we speak about all the time. And I think that's something that people talk about all the time. And you mentioned you didn't quit, but maybe you adjust things along the way and maybe you come up with a different strategy, but you only really lose and fully lose in that sense is when you give up.
Yeah, absolutely.
With that in mind, I would like to ask if you could just briefly tell us a little bit about who you are in addition to the speaker, and maybe you can touch on your fantastic podcast as well.
Thank you. So I spent my career in sales and marketing, and I would go to these conferences, and if you've been to conferences, sometimes there's celebrity speakers, sometimes there's industry speakers, but there was this swath of people in the middle who were professional speakers who weren't famous, but were entertaining, they were engaging, they had excellent content. And I really, for years, this goes back 15 or 20 years, I thought that's a better job than I have. And so I sort of spent about close to a decade decade sort of stalking the speaking industry. I started attending things for the National Speakers Association. I started meeting people who did this for a living and befriending them. And then when I made the switch to go full time 8.5 years ago, it wasn't like this cold turkey type thing. So, I guess I identify myself as a speaker and a master of ceremonies, and I do, somewhere between 40 and 50 gigs a year. I'm on the road 125 days. But really, that's just what I do for a living. I mean, beyond that, I have this podcast called Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. Part of the reason I do that is much like getting into the speaking business, I had to surround myself with people who made their living as speakers. I as an entrepreneur, I run my own business. I have to surround myself with people who are carving their own path in the world. And then more important than that, I'm been married 26 and a half years, and I have two almost adult children. I have a college student and a high school student, and I'm very proud of both of them. And so I guess that sort of rounds me out.
I love it. I appreciate that background. And as a speaker myself, and also clearly, obviously, a podcast host, I think that's been the best part about doing this, is the ability to connect with so many different people. And I think the best part is just the relationships that get formed, not only from the show, but also from the stage. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit about that with us.
Sure.
So speaking of podcast, and a lot of our guests and a lot of our listeners happen to be podcasters, and perhaps some of our listeners that might want to get into the podcasting world, I just wanted to ask you, at some point you obviously had a thought and a concept or idea about your podcast, but then you actually went ahead and put it into fruition, and now you have a very successful podcast. Is there one piece of advice along the way that really helped you take it from an idea and a concept and actually putting it into an actual show?
Yeah, so the idea and concept came, I was a blogger before that, and I wrote a recurring blog post most Fridays. I don't think I did it every Friday, for about a year, maybe two, that was called Cool Things My Friends Do. And the way it came about was I got kind of tired of just pontificating my thoughts about your network, your brand, sales, marketing, the stuff that I was an expert on, and just spewing out my thoughts. And it kind of got tired of talking about me and my ideas. And so I started every week highlighting something cool that someone I knew did. Maybe they wrote a book, maybe they rented a motorcycle and drove across the country, whatever. I mean, it was everything from business to fun. And if I thought, wow, that's kind of cool, I wrote about it on the show. And somebody said, this was 3.5 years ago, podcasts were starting to explode on the scene. Somebody said, well, you should turn that into a podcast. And the reality was, I didn't think anybody would want to listen to a show called Cool Things Tom's Friends Do, because I wasn't anybody. But I had this whole concept of, I like hanging out with entrepreneurs, and I think, a lot of them were my friends anyway. So that's where Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do came from. But the one piece of advice I was told was that most people fall into pod fade. And basically, if your listeners haven't heard that before, it's that after they do 7 or 8 episodes, hey, I'm going to do it once a week or twice a week or every day or whatever. But after 7 to 15 episodes, it gets tedious and they're not getting the listenership they want. So then it becomes the occasional podcast. I was talking to a friend who has an occasional podcast, and he goes, I can't get a lot of downloads. And I'm like, that's because it's never there. I mean, it's once a month, and it's twice a month, and it's 6 months later. So the thing I was told was I had to be grossly consistent to whatever I was doing. And I have a show that's twice a week. And so, in keeping with your theme, I couldn't quit. I just had to keep going. And about a month or two ago, I hit 300 episodes, so just over 3 years. And I did miss a few. I mean, every now and then I would miss a show, but really only maybe 10 in 3 years. And this year, around the 300th episode, my show started to sort of take off. It started to get more recognition, started to get more listeners. And when they introduced me from the stage, part of my intro that the MC will read off is that, Tom is the host of the Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do podcast that's now over 3 years in the running with over 300 episodes. And people in the audience now, I always mention the podcast, but people in the audience now come up and they go, 300 episodes? Tell me about this. And all of a sudden they're subscribing while they're standing around, in front of me. So I think consistency and longevity and no quit was the key to being able to make the podcast work.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. And from now on, when I get introduced, I'm going to say I'm the host of your show as well, so I can add some extra episodes.
That's great.
So I wanted to ask you, how do you define success?
I get caught up like everybody else in money. I'm a big goal setter. I started off as a speaker, sort of teaching people how to set goals, and now in this one program that I have that's kind of becoming my hottest thing called the paradox of potential. It falls everything that's the answer to the gap between potential and results falls into three areas, and the first area is people don't have a plan. And so I'm a real big believer in setting goals. And if you were to look at my goals for 2018, money is a part of it. Like I have how much, I want to earn next year as far as my sales numbers. And we can get really easily caught up in that. And I do all the time. And I've been doing this will be my 9th year. I've been caught up in the money a lot of the time. But in reality, I think, I'm also not one of these people who has to make $1 million a year. I get around all these people at podcaster events or speaker events, and they all want to make $1 million a year. I don't really need to make $1 million a year. I need to make a living that will support my family, allow my kid to go to a grossly expensive college, but she's getting a good education, so it's probably worth it. But allow the other kid to go to an equally as prestigious and expensive college when she gets there in a couple years. But the key thing to me to success is the people in my life like me. Am I contributing on that level to people? Because I know a lot of people who are making probably can't say that, a lot of money more than me. However, they don't have a lot of friends. I talked to a guy who makes close to $1 million a year, and we were talking about something, and he says, I don't really have any friends. He goes, I have some colleagues, but I don't really have any friends. And I thought, that's not success. So I think success is, we went out to California for Thanksgiving, and we had a couple of extra days, and my family went and stayed with the family of my best friend from kindergarten. And our 15-year-olds have become really, really close friends over the years, and we kind of trade off each summer who gets the other person's kid. We've taken vacations with them, and we're sitting in his backyard drinking wine, and I sort of looked across the table, and I thought, I don't remember when this guy wasn't part of my life. We've known each other. He was the first birthday party I ever went to in kindergarten was his birthday party. We were 6 years old. And I thought, that's success when you can have a friendship that spans 45 years.
That's been one of the best parts about the show is asking that question, because people define success differently. And I think, like you mentioned, when you define it as a monetary number, and not that you don't want to be successful, but I think there's so much more to it. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And one of the things you touched on, I just wanted to mention, is the paradox of potential. And one of the things that we're gaining a lot of traction right now with our coaching, teaching, and speaking and training is the concept of results versus resolutions. And it's something that I'm very specific about and very excited about, because I think people completely miss the ball when it comes to New Year's resolutions, and we focus on the results. And I think it's important. And you mentioned having goals, and a lot of our guests have had some very specific goals, and it's okay to have monetary goals, because you do need to put food on the table, and in your case, pay for 2 very grossly expensive colleges. So you need to have those monetary pieces as well, but you also need to have those personal things. And as you mentioned, and I appreciate you referencing that individual that makes almost close to $1 million but doesn't have any real friends. To me, that's not success. I'd rather have half that or a third of that and have a ton of friends. And I don't know the quote offhand, so I'm going to butcher it, but there's a quote that talks about you can define your level of success by the number of real, true friends you have.
Yeah, well, I think that is a great way to look at it. And I've been very fortunate in my life. I have had, a lot of people, come through my life, and some of them come and go. But for the most part, I've remained friends with people from elementary school and high school and college. And, for the most part, I think we add to each other's lives still.
That's awesome. So if you had to define yourself in one word, what would that word be?
Father. I think that the legacy I leave behind is the opportunities I can give to my 2 daughters. I like to believe I'm a good brother. I think I was a good son. Both my parents have passed away. I try very hard to be a good husband, but I think the most important role is being dad to these 2 girls.
And I have 3 young kids myself, and I think that is by far the most difficult job out there. Not a father, but a father or a mother.
Yeah, no, I was a stay-at-home dad for 2 years when the oldest, who is now 20, almost 21, when she was a baby. And later on, when I went back to the workforce, one of the people who hired me said, "You were a stay-at-home dad for 2 years?" And people had counseled me that would hurt my career. This guy was like, "I'll hire you. If you could do that for 2 years, there's nothing I could throw at you that you can't handle. That's the hardest job ever." And I'm like, yeah, it's not for the weak of heart.
No, I could not agree more. I have my 3 kids certain mornings and things getting ready for school or the weekends, and after an hour or two by myself, I'm ready to wave the red flag. So assuming the 20-year-old version of yourself would have listened, what is the one piece of advice you would have given the 20-year-old Thom?
Start earlier. I think that if I could go back and change one thing in my life, I would have branched out on my own. I don't know if I'd be doing the same thing, but I would have had the faith and the trust in myself to be able to go out and start my own path rather than putting my ladder against the corporate wall for 20 plus years.
I think that's interesting. That's been a common theme from that question, is a lot of people, the advice that they give themselves is to start early. And I think that's great advice, because a lot of other people say, oh, I would have done this differently and I would have done that. But I always feel that you learn from everything. But I think starting early is a great piece of advice, because a lot of us, as we've been more successful in different phases in life, you wish you'd started that phase a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What's the best piece of advice you remember ever receiving?
Oh, I mean, I've been asked this question before, and this is an easy one. It comes from my dad, and that is be slow to anger and fast to forgive. My dad always said that too many people get so upset, they take everything personally. Someone cuts them off on the freeway and they think they did it on purpose. They didn't realize the person was, racing to whatever, that didn't even notice you. And people do it in closer relationships. They get mad at their wife, they get mad at their brother, they get mad at their business partner, and they think that this other person has somehow dastardly set out to harm them. And in reality, it might have been a slight. It wasn't something that was thought out. It was an accidental thing that caused you the harm. And even if it was intentional, be a little bit faster to forgive. And my dad was always very easygoing. Now, he was in his 50s when I was born. I had a little bit of the advantage. It was like being raised by a grandfather, because he'd already raised 3 sons. My brothers were 10, 12, and 14 when I was born. And my mom was younger than my dad. So surprise, they still were able to have another kid. If my dad was here, he would tell you now that I was a surprise, because a surprise is an accident that worked out really good, because he liked me. But he was 52 when I was born, and he lived to be 99 years old. And he just took it all with a grain of salt. He never felt bad about getting old. He never, complained about, as he started to have to slow down. He never got angry, and he was quick to forgive both others and himself for whatever was going on. And I think that's a great way to live.
Well, your father never got old. He just got more experienced.
No, he got old.
So, if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I think Teddy Roosevelt. And I'll tell you why. I picked Teddy Roosevelt because I love that famous quote, and I'll butcher it because I don't have it in front of me, but the man in the arena, and it's all about the fact that it says that the critics are really easy to throw criticisms, but it's the person who is there, rolling up their sleeves and doing the work that is really the one to be admired. And I just sort of love sort of that Teddy Roosevelt attitude, about, pull up your boots and go get stuff done.
No, that's a great quote, and that would be quite an interesting dinner.
Yeah, I would think so.
So as we're always looking to add value to our listeners, I was curious if you have either a daily or a morning ritual that you personally swear by.
Yeah, so I listen to your podcast, and I listen to other podcasts where they ask people about sort of their rituals and their mantras and their daily things they do, the morning thought they have when they get out of bed. That's so awesome for those people. I am not that good at systems. I'm not that good at following the thing, and I've tried all kinds of things. I've tried to meditate. I've tried to have like a morning wake-up thought. I've tried to do all these different things. I don't have anything that I do when I wake up in the morning. I break all the rules. I check my emails and texts from the night before. I binge on CNN or Fox and MSNBC, and I like to watch all 3 of them, because it's like you live in 3 different countries. If you change the channels every 10 minutes, it's like the entire perspective of the same story is 3 different ways. I do everything wrong. I have no possible good routine when it comes to doing what you're asking.
I love it. You do everything wrong. So for our listeners today, follow Thom and do everything wrong.
Yeah. I mean, people have great advice about routines and things they do. And I used to be 30 pounds heavier, and I've only worked out now for the last year and a half. But people are like, oh, do it at the same time of day. Yeah, that would be so awesome. I don't do that. I do it whenever I can fit it in.
It's interesting, and I really appreciate your candor with that answer. But what you spoke about is so true, is you've tried different things. And I think that's one of the things we talk about, and that's one of the parts of the show that I love that question. And I always get a lot of feedback from different people. And that question is one of the questions that the listeners really like because they get different things from different people. And the fact that you've tried them all, you've understood that certain things do and don't work for you. And I think that's the best part about trying and then failing again is figuring out what works for you. And what works for you in the morning doesn't work for me, and it might not work for somebody else. But
there was another podcaster who for a long time talked about how he took like ice cold showers every morning. And I thought, wow, he's really successful, and he talked about all it did for his mind and this and that. I tried it one time for like 30 seconds and I'm like, okay, he's an idiot, not doing that.
I have to say, I've tried that 3 or 4 times, and I think I maybe lasted 10, 15 seconds each time. So that's definitely not for me either. So we'd like to take a little bit of a different spin here to the section we call the hot seat questions. And this is where we'd like to learn a little bit more about our guests. So the only request we have for you is just spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
All right. My seat, I'm feeling a little warm right now.
So if you knew that you only had one last meal, what would you choose for your last meal?
Mexican food.
What's your favorite sport?
Hockey. To watch. I don't play it. I mean, that would be ridiculous. But yeah, I've become since my daughter moved to Pittsburgh for college 2 years ago, I became a Penguins fan. I'd never been to a hockey game before, and I've now been to like 3 or 4 Penguins games, and I would go to any hockey game anywhere. I think they're awesome.
So favorite team?
The Penguins.
I figured you'd say that.
Wait a minute. I've been a fan for 2 years, and do you know what they've done both years?
They've won
Stanley Cup. So therefore, it's clearly a good idea to have me as your fan.
It is, but now there's a lot of pressure on this year, so you might have just jinxed yourself. All-time favorite movie?
Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield.
Great flick. Favorite book?
Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged.
Favorite vacation spot?
Oh, wow. Everywhere in Europe.
And if you were in a foxhole and you could only have one person in there with you to have your back, who would that be?
Probably my wife. She's always got my back. I don't always let her know it, but I know that she always has my back.
You don't have to tell her, she knows it.
Sometimes I think she thinks I don't know it. She knows it. She just doesn't always know that I know it.
So before we let you go, I wanted to ask if you have anything exciting that you're working on or something you'd like to talk to our listeners about. My most exciting thing that I've got going on is my podcast. As I've gotten over 300 episodes, I think it's started to get better. And so check out cool things entrepreneurs do. I think some of the interviews, especially, from about, mid 200s on, I think that they're really compelling. And if they care about sort of the journey that people take and what cool things entrepreneurs do and advice they have, I think they'll like it. It's a great show, and I might be biased, but I would definitely tell the listeners to check it out.
And they should check out the episode that you're on because it's going to be awesome.
Yes, I must say they should check it out. So before we let you go, Thom, I wanted to ask you if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I think the name of your show says it all. Don't quit.
I could not agree more, and I'll send you that check in the mail for that plug.
Well, yeah, don't quit, and don't quit listening to this show. Go back to all the past episodes. If this episode's about over, just go back and listen to the one right before it and the one before that. Don't quit listening to this show unless you're going to go listen to my show.
Kuda. Touche. So before we let you go, last question for our listeners. In addition to your podcast, which I would definitely recommend, what's the best way for them to follow you or connect with you?
Everything is at thomsinger.com. That's THOMSINGER.com. But if you spell Tom TOM without the H, thomsinger.com, you're still going to get to thomsinger.com because I own them both.
That is awesome. That is all. I thought you were going to say you go to another Thom Singer.
No. There's a guy who wants to buy it, but I won't sell it.
Everybody's got a price.
And mine is a big one.
Hey, there you go. Well, listen, Thom, I truly appreciate not only your time, but also your insight. And I would recommend that our listeners check out your podcast because it's been remarkable for me just to listen along. And anybody that has passed 300 episodes, major kudos to you. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to episode number 87. Thom Singer was able to make a career change later on in life, and 8.5 years later, He is an incredibly successful podcast host, speaker, and master of ceremonies. And the reason he is because he didn't quit. Thom fully believes that people that quit don't succeed. When I asked Thom the best advice he has ever received, he shared something that I thought was great. That advice was be slow to anger and fast to forgive. With 3 young kids myself and a business, I took that to heart. For today's call to action, I ask you to please be slow to anger and fast to forgive, whether it's with your family, your friends, or your coworkers. Today, be slow to anger. Mind your temper, and if someone does you wrong and apologizes, forgive them quickly. Personally, I can't go back to yesterday or last week, but I can pay it forward today as I go for my greatness.
And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.